They called him crazy, a black man who whispered to animals like they were old friends. But when he pulled two blindfolded creatures from a white man's wagon, he uncovered something no one else dared to see. By dawn, they called him a traitor, and the town still calls him crazy. But why? They called him that crazy colored man in the hills. Said he'd gone soft in the head after the war. Said he talked to trees, to animals, to ghosts maybe. But Isaiah Boone didn't care what they said. He'd seen too much already. Blood on boots, bodies left nameless, orders barked by men who'd never bleed. The war took his youth. The town took his name, and now all he had was silence. And his small ranch tucked between the red hills, far enough away that no one came unless they meant trouble. That morning, Isaiah came into town for flour, salt, and a few canning jars. His boots scraped against the dust of a place that never forgave him for surviving. He didn't look up when folks crossed the street or pulled their children closer. He'd learned not to, until he heard it. A low, aching cry, not from a man, but from behind Ezra Cormack's merchant wagon. Not a sound you'd expect in the middle of a trading day. It was the kind of noise that didn't belong in sunlight, the kind you only heard when something was suffering in silence. Isaiah stopped, slowly turned. Ezra Cormack, the well-dressed white trader with gold teeth and a whip tucked at his belt, was shouting to a group of farmers about spices and fabrics from the Orient. But Isaiah didn't hear that. His eyes drifted to the back of the wagon. Two donkeys, blindfolded, trembling, blood dried along their ribs, their legs scarred with whip marks, their heads wrapped tight in burlap sacks like they weren't even creatures, just cargo. One, a gray female, pressed her head against the other, tried to breathe, to find something familiar in the dark. Isaiah's jaw locked, not from surprise, but from recognition. He'd seen that look before in the faces of his people. Faces lashed, chained, silenced, taught to obey or disappear. He stepped down from his wagon. The townspeople barely noticed. Most of them were too busy watching Cormack. The rest wouldn't care even if they had. To them, cruelty was a price others paid. Isaiah walked up slowly. The animals flinched. He knelt beside them, whispering low, gentle, careful. That's when he saw it. Just beneath the matted hair on the gray one shoulder, a faded brand. Clean, circular, professional. Not from a farm. From a government hand. A military courier mark. His eyes flicked to the brown donkey. Another brand, mostly burned away, scarred over, but still there. These weren't ordinary animals. And someone had tried hard to erase who they were. He stood up, faced Cormack. How much for the pair? The crowd hushed. Ezra laughed. For these beat-up mules? He grinned, eyes shining. $50 if you're fool enough. That was 2 months' pay for most men in that town. But Isaiah didn't blink. He untied the leather pouch at his belt. Every dollar he had, save for winter. He handed it over. Cormack raised an eyebrow, clearly shocked. Well now, guess even fools got money. Isaiah didn't answer. He just turned to the animals, hand steady, voice softer than wind through pine. You're coming home now, he whispered. Ain't nobody gonna take your name again. He reached for the ropes, and that's when the story truly began. Isaiah's fingers worked the knots slowly, each twist revealing another layer of cruelty. The ropes weren't just tied. They were designed to tighten with movement, to punish even the smallest attempt at freedom. Every fiber in those knots whispered, stay down. Don't fight. You don't matter. His hands moved with care. No rush. Like unwrapping something sacred that the world had already discarded. The burlap was soaked with dried blood and something else, something sour and old. Shame maybe. He loosened the first blindfold. The gray donkey flinched but didn't pull away. Then, with a final tug, the fabric slipped. What stared back at him wasn't broken. Pale blue eyes. Too bright. Too intelligent. Too aware. It wasn't the look of a beast. It was the look of someone remembering who they were. His breath caught. The brown one's blindfold came off next. Same eyes. Same burning question behind them. Why did it take so long for someone to care? People still stood nearby, watching, not helping. Isaiah could feel their stares on his back, that same mix of pity and fear, like they were seeing something they weren't supposed to, like the moment was too real for their quiet, safe lives. He didn't look up, just led the donkeys, step by step, away from the wagon, away from the silence, toward his own cart waiting by the road. But he felt it, a shift. Someone, maybe just one soul in that crowd, had noticed. The ride home was long, hours of winding trails and low mountain wind. But the donkeys didn't resist. No ropes, no force. They followed like they understood, like they chose to. Back at the ranch, the air was cooler. Still, no voices, no judgment, just pine and sky and the creak of an old gate that hadn't seen guests in years. He filled the trough, piled soft hay in the corner, let them drink, eat, be. The gray one pressed her nose to his hand. Gently, gratefully. "I'll call you Glory," he whispered. "And him, let's say Bishop." It fit. He lit a lamp. And that's when he saw what had been hidden in plain sight. Under their dried wounds were military brands. Clean, circular, identical, U.S. cavalry. Courier animals, elite, trusted with secrets, not just burdens. But someone had tried to erase that, burned, carved, mutilated them, not to hurt them, but to hide who they were. And suddenly, Isaiah wasn't just looking at abused creatures. He was looking at evidence. And someone had wanted that evidence to disappear. Quietly, permanently, buried in the back of a black man's barn no one believed in. But Glory and Bishop had survived. And now, he had to decide if he'd stay silent too. The next morning, Isaiah woke with the kind of weight in his chest he hadn't felt since the war. Rain had passed through the night, washing the trail clean, soaking the earth, making everything quieter. Too quiet. He lit his stove, boiled water, sat on the wooden steps of his cabin, watching fog roll across the pines. Then he heard them, 3 horses, hooves crunching wet gravel. He knew that sound, measured, purposeful, not friendly. He stepped off the porch before they could reach the barn. Notice the one in front, Ezra Cormack. Same snake smile, same boots too clean for this land. But this time he wasn't alone. 2 white men flanked him, lean, mean, fingers resting on their gun belts like it was casual. "Morning, Boone," Ezra called. "Heard you picked up something special yesterday. I come make things right. Offer you a trade." Isaiah didn't blink. "Ain't nothing left to trade." "Now see, that's where you're wrong," Ezra said. "Turns out them animals are worth more than I thought. I undersold. So I'm here with my boys to buy them back. $75. Clean profit." Isaiah's hand hovered near the axe by the post. Not reaching, just remembering. "I'm not selling." Ezra's smile thinned. The man on his left shifted, the leather creaking under his coat, gun heavy on his hip. "This ain't really a negotiation, Boone," the man said, his voice slick with mock politeness. "Don't want no trouble, but you don't want to get difficult." From the barn, a voice cut through like dry brush snapping. "I wouldn't say that if I were you." It was Clara Reyes, the local vet, Mexican-American, tougher than half the men in that county, and standing there with her medical bag and her badge from the Animal Welfare Board, legal, visible, witnessed. "I came to check on the animals," she said, walking past the gunmen like they were made of mist. "Now I'm seeing men with guns making threats. That's a problem." Ezra hesitated. He hadn't counted on a witness, especially not her. "That ain't what's happening," he tried. "We're just having a conversation. Private matter." "Animal cruelty isn't private," Clara replied. "Not in this state. Not in mine." She walked into the barn. The silence outside tightened. Isaiah didn't move. Inside, he heard her examining Glory, heard her breath catch. Then her voice again, low but clear. "These brands. Isaiah, where'd he say he got them?" "Said a farm outside Kansas City." "Liar," she whispered. "These aren't farm animals. These are federal. Cavalry stock. Courier class." She stepped back out into the morning fog. "These animals are stolen government property," she announced, "and they've been mutilated to hide it." Ezra's jaw tensed, and for the first time, he looked scared. Ezra stepped down from his horse slowly. his boots sinking into wet earth. Gone was the charming salesman. What stood before them now was a man realizing his secret was slipping. "You're making wild accusations," he said, voice too calm. "There's no proof those animals weren't mine. You got papers? Witnesses? Ain't nobody gonna believe the word of a Negro hermit in a—" He didn't finish the sentence. Clara's eyes flared. "Finish that thought, Ezra." Silence. The two gunmen shifted again, unsure now, guns half drawn, but something in the air had changed. Clara wasn't backing down. And Isaiah, he hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, because the fear was gone now, replaced by something steadier. Righteous. Clara stepped forward. "I'll be filing a full report with the territorial marshal. You want to challenge that? Go ahead, but you'll be doing it in court with military officers listening." Ezra's smile was gone completely. His eyes flicked to Isaiah, calculating. He wasn't used to people standing this tall in front of him, especially not people like them. But Isaiah was done being small. "I know what you're hiding," he said, voice low. "And I know why those animals were worth killing for." Ezra's jaw twitched. "You don't know nothing. I know enough. I know there's more than just cruelty here. There's treason. And you thought hiding it in front of a black man meant it'd stay buried." The scarred man on the left reached for his gun, but froze when he saw movement on the ridge. Horses, 6 of them. Tom Reyes, Clara's cousin, leading the deputy, and a handful of townsfolk who'd come not with curiosity, but with concern. They'd heard whispers. Now they saw the truth. Ezra backed away, eyes darting. "This ain't over." "No," Clara said. "But you are." And just like that, they turned their horses and rode off. Fast, reckless, like men who just realized a trap they built had started to close. Isaiah exhaled. Clara turned to him. "That was brave." "No," he said. "That was necessary." She looked at the barn, at Glory and Bishop, still, silent, watching. "There's more, isn't there?" Isaiah nodded. "There's something inside them, something they were carrying." He reached for the small pouch hidden behind Bishop's ear, sewn into his skin. Military-style field concealment, infection around the stitches, pain and purpose. Inside the leather, a packet wrapped in waxcloth. Clara opened it and gasped. Troop schedules, gold transfer routes, orders stamped by high command, dated just 2 weeks ago. This wasn't about animals. This was about war. And someone was willing to kill to control the map. Isaiah sat on the barn floor long after Clara had gone. The lamp flickered low. The documents lay open beside him. Orders signed in wax, stained by blood and weather. They were real. No denying that now. And they were dangerous. He leaned against a wooden post, eyes fixed on Glory. She lay quiet, breathing slow, her ears twitching now, and then like she was dreaming of open fields that didn't exist anymore. Bishop stood watch, eyes alert. Still, Isaiah whispered, "They used you, just like they used us." No answer came, just silence and memory. By dawn, the decision was made. He would ride to the marshal in Juniper Ridge. 2 days north, rugged terrain, no roads. But he'd spent enough of his life in shadows, watching men like Ezra build power off pain. Not anymore. He saddled his cart, checked the rifle, packed the documents, and wrapped them in oiled leather. Then paused. He looked at Bishop. The donkey stepped forward before he could say a word. Calm, ready, like he already knew. "Then it's you and me, old boy," Isaiah said softly. "We end this." But before they could leave, he heard hooves. Again, only this time more of them. Coming fast, the dust trail rose beyond the ridge, cutting through the trees like a warning. Isaiah stepped outside, squinting into the morning light. It was Ezra again, but this time he wasn't smiling, and he wasn't asking. 6 riders, all armed. The last one hung back slightly, watching, scouting. Someone had been left behind to spy, and now they were coming to erase the problem. Isaiah's jaw clenched. His hand went to the rifle strapped beneath the cart. Inside the barn, Bishop let out a low breath. Not panic, just readiness. Then another figure appeared, Clara, galloping up the trail from the opposite side. Behind her, the sheriff's deputy. Tom, a few more townsfolk, hesitant but armed. It wasn't a war, but it wasn't a rescue either. It was a moment, one of those rare razor-thin moments when the world watches a black man and waits to see. Will he fold, or will he rise? The standoff felt like thunder before the storm. Ezra dismounted first. Slow, confident, hands loose but dangerous. Behind him, his men fanned out like shadows, their boots silent on the wet soil, guns still holstered for now. Isaiah, Ezra called, voice smooth, you've had time to think. Now let's be reasonable. Isaiah didn't answer. He stood still, spine straight, rifle resting against the edge of the cart. Clara was on his left, Tom just behind her. The others? They watched, unsure if this was justice or a funeral in slow motion. Ezra took a step closer. You give me the animals and whatever came with them, and we walk away. No one has to get hurt. Isaiah looked him in the eye. That's a lie. Ezra flinched. You don't want silence, Isaiah continued. You want erasure. You want the truth to vanish, like it never existed. Clara stepped forward. We've already contacted the marshal. And the military. They're coming. Ezra's face twitched. Too late. The scarred man behind him reached for his belt. Isaiah raised a rifle before the leather even squeaked. Don't. One word. Final. Not loud, but enough to stop hands in midair. It was no longer a debate. This was a reckoning. Then from the ridge, the sound of more horses. Federal blue. Cavalry. Dust rising behind them like judgment. Ezra cursed under his breath. His men backed up, slowly, nervously. He turned. But before he could mount his horse, Isaiah spoke again. You tried to hide it in me. Thought if you buried your crime in a black man's barn, no one would care. That nobody would listen. That's the story of this country, ain't it? Ezra didn't reply. Not today. The marshal's voice rang out behind him. Drop your weapon, Cormac. This is over. Ezra didn't fight. Didn't dare. Because the weight of truth had finally caught up. The cavalry dismounted. Evidence was gathered. Statements taken. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, Glory and Bishop stood together. Unchained, unhidden, still breathing. Alive. Witnesses. That night, the barn was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of shame. It was peace. Earned. Heavy. Real. Glory rested near the back wall. Eyes half closed, her breathing slow and deep. Bishop stood watch. As always, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Isaiah sat with his back to the post, arms resting on his knees. The war was over, but it had left marks. The kind nobody sees, unless they've worn the same chains. Unless they know what it means to be used, then discarded, then blamed for still standing. In the distance, lanterns flickered along the town road. Word had spread fast. Some folks came with baskets, blankets, awkward offerings for a man they'd ignored for years. Isaiah didn't open the door. He wasn't ready to forgive their silence yet. But he wasn't bitter either. He just knew now. Knew that no title, no badge, no color of skin gave anyone the right to erase another soul's truth. Clara sat beside him. They hadn't said much since the marshal left. She looked at the donkeys, then at him. You changed things. Isaiah shook his head. No, I just refuse to be a place where lies could hide. She nodded slowly. That's what change is. From outside, a child's voice called softly. Mr. Boone, they said you saved the army. Isaiah didn't respond. He didn't need to, because what mattered wasn't what they said now. It was what they refused to see before, and whether they'd ever truly look again. The next morning came without drama. No riders, no threats, just the slow gold light of the sun that didn't care who you were or what color your skin carried. Isaiah opened the barn doors and stood in the stillness. For a moment, the whole world felt quiet enough to breathe again. Glory walked to him first. Her limp had eased. Her eyes softened now, not healed, but healing. Then Bishop came beside her. He didn't nuzzle, didn't bow. He just stood next to Isaiah, like they were equals, like they understood something no one else ever would. Isaiah smiled faintly. Y'all made it. He meant the donkeys. He meant himself, maybe even the town. Later that day, a government wagon arrived. Military seal. 2 officers in uniform. Respectful, professional, careful with their words. They asked for the documents. They took notes. They looked over Glory and Bishop with tight jaws and downcast eyes. One of them, a younger officer with freckles on his knuckles, asked quietly, "Why'd you step in?" You could have looked away. Isaiah looked at him. Long calm. "They looked away at me for years," he said. "Didn't mean I had to do the same." The officer nodded. Didn't write that part down. But he wouldn't forget it. As they rode off, Clara placed a hand on Isaiah's shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "this story, it won't be told right. Not by them. Not in their papers." Isaiah's eyes didn't leave the road. "I know. You still okay with that?" He thought for a second, then nodded. "Yeah, because Glory and Bishop know. I know. You know." He paused. "And sometimes that's enough." A few weeks passed. No parades, no medals, no headlines in the county paper. But Isaiah didn't expect any. Truth is, some victories don't echo. They just settle quietly into the soul of a place. The barn stayed full of breath and light. Glory grew strong. Bishop watched the hills like he still had orders to carry. Their scars didn't vanish, but they no longer defined them. Isaiah spent his days repairing the corral, chopping wood, feeding the quiet. At night, he'd sit under the stars with a chipped tin cup, listening to the wind. Sometimes Clara would join him, sometimes not. But there was peace now, not loud, not showy, just honest. One evening, a black boy from town came riding up the trail, maybe 9 years old, curious, nervous, holding a worn satchel full of school books. "Sir, is it true you fought off bad men with just 2 donkeys and a shotgun?" Isaiah laughed, not mocking, just soft. "Real? Nah," he said. "Wasn't the shotgun that made him run." "Then what was it?" Isaiah stood slowly, brushing dust from his hands. "It was the part of me they didn't see coming." The boy looked confused. Isaiah handed him a carrot to feed Glory. "She ain't just a donkey," he said. "She's a witness." The boy watched as Glory gently took the carrot, her pale eyes locking onto his like she was reading more than just his face. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not teaching, just truth. Because that's how justice works sometimes. Not in courts, not in salutes, but in memory, in someone refusing to stay invisible, in someone choosing to see what others pretend not to, and in a story that doesn't need to be believed, to still be true.